Hey guys, JK Wargames, and today we got a review for Normandy, The Beginning of the End, a game by Draco Ideas. This is a tactical level war game that concentrates on the Normandy campaign in 1944. What we're going to do is we're going to have a look at some of the components. I'll do a little playthrough and then I'll give my final thoughts. So first up, we have the rulebook. This is in full colour. Everything you need to know is in here to play. It's full colour. It's got loads of examples in here. Line of sight, different levels. Really easy to understand. Counter information, examples. There's so many examples. I like to see that in a rulebook. Look, there's a whole page dedicated to examples. So that's the rulebook. Then we also get the Normandy exclusive rules. Now in here we have a bit of history about beach landings. We have different rules for different terrain like bocage, etc. And then we have some rhino tanks with hedge cutters. So we're not going to be looking at the exclusive rules gameplay wise, just the standard rules. Now, counters in the game are some of the best counters I've seen, I think. They really are gorgeous. So, if I can get this to focus, here's an airborne counter. Love the artwork on it. Super. I haven't clipped my counters yet. So, if we turn this over, that's the reduced side. Okay, let's have a look at German infantry. Really nice, really colourful, good sized counters. And then you get your officers, and these are kind of the main part of the game. This is commanding platoons, and you're going to be using your officers a lot. So that's a German officer, and then we've got an American officer here. Let's have a look. There he is there. Then we get some player aid charts. So we have a combat chart. This is when you roll for firing. You've got your modifiers, you've got anti-tank modifiers. Then you've got your hand-to-hand combat. On the other side, you've got an odds chart for the defenders. You've got all types, aerial attacks, everything on here, spotting chart. You've got that. Then you've got your terrain player aid. Now this is, you're going to be using this a lot. So this tells you what it costs. So in the woods, it costs infantry 2 movement points. It would cost a tank 6 and a half track 4. And then you're also going to use this to work out the defensive value for the. So when you're attacked, if you're in a woods, that's your defensive value of 4, and then whether it blocks line of sight and the height of the terrain as well, and that's double-sided. So you have that. Then you have about 23 scenarios in total, which is ridiculous. There are so many scenarios here. I've played about 4 of them so far, and really enjoyed them. The boxes on here are where you put the turn track, and the turn's going to go up to turn 8. It's different for each one. On this scenario here, these are greyed out because it starts off at night time. And that gives you your setup, some brief history, and historical aftermath, which I thought was really cool as well. So you've got 23 of those. Then you're going to get all your other counters. Now this is a Kickstarter exclusive. So if you purchase the game just separate, you might not get this. This is a review copy, which I have to thank Draco Ideas for sending to the channel. So they included this Kickstarter stuff as well. So you've got some exclusive counters. So I don't think you'll find these normal infantry counters in the normal game. So you've got that. There's tons here. Let's have a look at some more of the maps here. So you can see the map in front of you. Obviously bocage, built up areas, roads. You get about 6 of these, and you've got to be careful when you open, because at first I thought, oh, they're just a one thick map, but they're not. You fold them out. So there's one there, another one here, again, folds out. And we also get the beach landing, if I can get it out here. So get the beach landing, which is really cool. Who wouldn't want to play D-Day beach landing? Awesome. So yeah, about six maps there. So let's have a look at the details on the counters and how the game plays. So this is an officer counter, and you can see here that he has a command range of 1 here. He has a movement of 5. His morale is an 8. He belongs to B company, and he's got a leadership of 1. So the command range is what his platoons need to be in command. So 1 hex away from him and his platoon is in command. If they were further away, they would be out of command. And in the action phase, each commander of a platoon is going to activate that platoon if his platoons are in command of him. So again, it's going to be the same for the German counters. Each officer has different values, so command range might be 1, 3, 2, etc. So let's now have a look at our infantry counter. Here we have an infantry counter, and you can see here on the left top corner is its fire factor, which is a 6, and if the number's in red, that means that they've got semi-automatic fire, so you'll get a modifier when you roll to hit an enemy. The white 5 is the movement, so they can move 5 hexes. The red 4 is the assault value for close combat, and then the D is to show what company he belongs to. So also, let's have a look at a tank counter. So here's a M4A3, 76mm. The first fire factor in yellow is a anti-personnel fire, light machine gun, which is a 5, and the 4 next to it is the range. It has 4 hex range. The white is the anti-tank, so that's its firing its main cannon, which is a fire factor of 8, again got a range of 4. Then the red 7 is its armor value. It can move 11 hexes down in the right corner. The 8 is the assault value, and it belongs to F company. So that's how the counters work. Nice and clear. Artwork is outstanding. Outstanding. Really, really nice. So let's go and have a look at how the game plays. Okay, so there are a few sequences to the game. So the first part of the turn is called the command phase, and what players do is check to see if their platoons are in command. So we can see here our officer has a command range of 2. So this platoon here, which is made up of 2 airborne infantry platoons, they are in command because they're 1 hex away. This single platoon here is in command because 1, 2. And the same for the machine gun down here, he is 2 hexes away. So this whole platoon is in command. If this machine gun was down here, he would be out of command because it's 1, 2, 3, and he's only got a command range of 2. In that case, this guy would have an out of command token on him, and out of command platoons activate differently, which I'll show a bit later. So both players check that platoons are in command or out of command. And once that's done, they're then going to roll for initiative, and you're going to roll one dice each, and the attacker, which will tell you in this scenario, normally gets a +1. So whoever gets the highest is the gets the initiative for the turn. If tie, if you roll and the modifiers work out that it's a tie, you re-roll until you get a result. So after the initiative phase, you go into the action phase. Now the action phase is where the main part of the game happens. So whoever has the initiative, let's say the Americans have, they pick an officer and activate his whole company and activate each platoon. After he's activated each platoon in his company, then he hands over to the German player. The German player activates his platoons, and then it goes back to the Americans. So you go back and forth until all platoons and officers have activated on the table. So, for an example, we get the initiative. So Sergeant Miller is going to order this platoon here to move, and they've got a movement rating of 5. So they're going to move as a stack 1, 2, 3. So we've crossed Bocage there, but when we look at our player aid, you can see that Bocage only costs 1 to go into, so that's fine. So they've done their movement, and once a platoon is done, you can only do one action, so they can't then fire. That is their action for this turn, so they are marked with a finish marker like that. Sergeant Miller is going to order this platoon to move up, so they move up. Let's say they move up to there. They're marked with a finish marker, and now he can't give an order to this platoon because they are out of command. If this platoon, they can attempt to do an activation, and they have to roll a morale check to see if they pass to activate because they're out of command. So once he's issued orders and he's moved himself to keep in command range, he's finished. And once everything's finished for that company, all the platoons, I would then hand over to the German player. And it goes back and forth until all of the companies and platoons have activated. So that's how activation works. Let's have a look at how firing attacking works. Okay, so how does firing work? So Sergeant Miller is ordering the airborne 2 platoons up here to lay down fire on this German infantry in the Bocage. So what we do is we take the fire factor, which is the top left corner, which is a 6. But because I've got 2 platoons in this hex, I can combine them together to make one fire group. So a 6 and 6, so that's 12. So we have a fire factor of 12. We roll 2d6 and we roll a 6. What we do is then we look on our fire chart, and we had a 12. That's your fire factor. And then you cross-reference on a 6, so you look at 6 over the side, on 12 is 5. That's not 5 hits, that's 5. So we take 5, and now we have to divide it by the terrain that the Germans are in, which the hex they're in is an open hex. Even though it does have Bocage, the actual main hex itself is classed as open. So it's a 2. So we do 5 divided by 2. So that would make 2.5. So we round it down. So it's 2 hits. So we've scored 2 hits on the German infantry. So the first hit will cause a -1 on a unit. Now, if we only had 1 hit, we would have to roll randomly to decide what platoon has been hit. But because we scored 2 hits, both of these platoons get a -1 marker, and that -1 will take off their fire factor. So instead of being a 6, it will go down to a 5. So let's say the Americans fire again, we get another result, but this time we get 3 hits. So it's at the same platoon. So again, we would reduce them. So you turn these to their reduced side, like this. First, if they receive a second hit, you flip the counter to its reduced side, but some of the counters might have a half track on the back of it. or a vehicle. So you can't flip those, so you would apply a -2. But for this, it's fine. So we can flip both of these. Now we've still got one more hit to apply. So once a platoon receives a third hit, it's eliminated. So both of them are reduced. We roll a dice. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's the first platoon. They are eliminated. So that platoon's eliminated, and that's the end of the action. And the airborne here would be marked as finished. And then Sergeant Miller could then activate this airborne platoon and they could start firing. So it's quite simple, but it's effective. Now, let's have a look at what happens when an officer is stacked with the group. So if this officer is stacked here and we receive one hit from the Americans, so we receive a -1 marker on the infantry, because the officer was with them, he has to check if he's been hit. So you roll 2d6 and minus the amount of hits. So we roll 2d6. I can't believe I just rolled that on camera. We rolled 2. We took one hit, so we minus 1 off, which leaves us with a 1. On a modified result of 1, the officer is killed. He's gone. I can't believe I just rolled that on camera. Normally, it's very hard for them to be killed. So, if an officer is killed like that, the next turn, a replacement officer is put in place. And you know what a replacement officer is because he will have a red band and his stats are slightly less. So, you do not want to lose officers. But anytime an officer is with them, you have to check. Also, if an officer is out in the open, if he receives one hit, he's killed. So you need to be really careful with your officers. So that's how infantry firing works. Pretty simple. Terrain does affect it. So if these guys are in a built-up building like this, and they received fire from this guy in the built-up buildings there, they now get a defensive value of 5. So he would roll his fire factor of 6, he would see how many hits he gets and then has to divide it by 5. So it's a lot harder to get hits on guys in buildings, which makes sense. So that's how firing works. Let's have a look at how morale checks work. So morale, we have 2 types of morale in the game. You have a company morale, which is your officer's morale, which is a 7 there, plus his leadership. Well, this Sergeant Miller's got a 0. So the company morale is a 7. Now, a morale check has to be made if a unit, if one of its platoons is eliminated, if the company's officer is eliminated after receiving a hit, and for each step loss suffered that surpasses the original number of platoons. So say you had 4 platoons and you lose one of those platoons, for every step loss over that, you're going to have to check for morale. Then you get platoon morale, which is where platoons that are out of command have to do a platoon morale. Now that is purely just your officer's 7. So if we had these guys out of command, they're going to roll 2d6. So we roll 2d6 and they rolled a 4, which would be a pass. But we have some modifiers. An infantry platoon out of command with 1 step loss, so let's say they did have 1 step loss, is a morale of 7 with a -1 for the step loss, so it'd be a 6. So they've still passed it, they're fine. Now if they failed it, if they rolled a 10, they failed that platoon morale. If they fail that by, if it's greater than the morale by 1 to 4, the platoon is marked as routed, which is not good. And a routed platoon has to move back 3 hexes for infantry and 5 for vehicles away from the infantry that caused it, or the target that caused it. So these guys would have to go 1, 2, 3 back. Now, The only way for these guys to become unrouted is for our officer to do a rally on him. Basically a morale check. So next time round, because they're 1-2 away, he can use an action to rally these guys. So he would roll, he'd roll a 2, they would not be routed anymore and they're back in the fight. If he failed, they would remain routed and they can't perform any actions. So being out of command is extremely dangerous, but as the game goes on, you're faced with choices of, well, I really want these guys to go up here and get this, but I need these guys to stay back here and defend this, so that you get this unique kind of system of you know, I'm going to have to risk these guys being out of command and hope they pass their platoon morale checks. So that's morale. Let's have a look at how tanks work in the game. Okay, tank combat in the game. So here we have an M4A3 and a Panzer IV. So at the setup of the game, tank platoons are going to have an officer assigned. So obviously the officer can give out orders when the action phase comes. So let's say this officer has ordered the M4A3 to fire at the Panzer IV. Now he uses the white box because that's anti-tank fire, and he has a range of 4 hexes. So let's say he's here, 1, 2, 3. So he's in range, that's fine. So he rolls 2d6 and he has a firepower of 8, but we have some modifiers, and the modifier we have is the shot passes through one edge of bocage. So we've got a +1 on our dice roll. In this game, you want your dice rolls to be low. So any negative modifiers add a plus. So we're going to roll our 2 dice. We've rolled a 5, but remember we have to plus that because of the bocage, so it's a 6. So we've rolled a 6. We now check our combat chart. So on an 8, remember, because we had a firepower of 8, and we've rolled a 6, gives us a 3. So what we do is we then divide that by the terrain that the tank's in. So 3, and the tank is in a field, which gives us a 2 for anti-tank fire. So it's 3 divided by 2, which would be 1.5. Rounded down gives us 1 hit. But this is where the difference is with tank combat, and I thought this was quite a cool, unique thing. So we have to check the penetration chart. We have to see if the shot actually done anything to the tank. So what we get is this chart here. So if I just zoom out a bit instead of bending the sheet, we look down here at the American. Now we have a 76mm gun on that, so we look at B, and we are 3 hexes away, so range in hexes. So 3 hexes away is a 12. So if we've beat their armour, we have a 12. So we then look at the armour of the Panzer IV. His armour is the red 8. So we've beaten his armour by quite a bit. So the shot has taken an effect, and then he loses a step loss. So a -1, which will affect him. A second hit is going to flip the tank to its reduced side, and then a third hit is going to eliminate that tank. So tank combat is quite simple. At first I thought, oh, you know, there's no sort of, well, what happens to that tank? You know, does it blow up? Does it do this? But the way the game works, that is, it doesn't need to be any more than that. You know, the whole combat system of this is units being reduced. So you can say that a reduced tank, you know, he could have his armor's hurt, maybe the track's hurting a bit, the gun's damaged, and that is all reflected in that, you know, step loss, which is cool. So if the German player fired, he's going to do the same thing, and then he would look on the German guns, and you can see down here it says on a B, a Panzer IV. So you look at B and you go across to 3, and if he got a hit, look, 16. So he would definitely cause damage on the Sherman because he's only got an armor of 7. So quite simple. So it's always that thing of your fire factor, working out modifiers, roll to get your result, then look up on the chart, take that number and divide it by the terrain that your target's in. Nice, simple, easy flowing system. Okay, let's have a look at close combat then. Okay, so assault. So our officer issues an order for these guys to move. If they are adjacent to an enemy, they can then attempt to perform an assault. So they would have to pass a morale check to see if they can get into the hex. Now, you have a choice. Does the officer go into the assault with them or not? The morale check will be, if the officer doesn't go into combat, it's just his morale of 8. But if he does, then it will be his leadership added, which is a 9. And you have to do a morale check for each of your platoons going in. So that's 3. So let's take this first one here. We rolled 2d6. He's rolled 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So he cannot enter into close combat. This guy rolls a double 6, so he can't enter. And then this guy rolls 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He can enter. So he would go in there and the officer goes with him. So that would be bad. But for this example, we're going to show all 3 platoons plus the officer going into close combat. So we've got 2 Germans and 3 of these. So we add up our fire factors. So the airborne have 4, 8, 12. Okay, so they have 12 as their close combat factor. The Germans have 4 and 4, which is 8. So we've worked out that the platoons, the American platoon has a attack factor of 12 and the Germans have a 8. So we look at our chart here, odds chart. So on the left hand side, the attacker value is a 12. The defender is an 8. We come down and we see that we have 1.5 to 1 odds. Okay, so then we take that to our chart here, hand-to-hand combat, and we roll 1 dice, and remember we have 1.5 to 1, so we're on this chart here. We roll 1d6, we rolled a 4, so a 4 is 0, 1. So as you can see, the result on the left corresponds to the attacker and the right is the defender. So the Americans didn't receive any hits, but the Germans took 1 hit. So they would take a step loss, and because no one's retreated, this close combat would continue. So if you see here, if you get a result like this, so each side takes 1 hit, but the defender has retreat 1 or retreat 2, and the Germans would have to retreat, and that combat is won by the Americans. So a system I've never really seen before. When I read it in the rules, I was kind of a bit okay, and I had to read it a few times, but once you get it, it's pretty easy to do. We won't look at tank assaults, that is in the game, but we don't need to look at that. So pretty cool system. So we also have an action called reaction. So in the German phase, let's say the officer commanded this platoon, these platoons here, to go on reaction. So reaction marker is placed on them. Now, we get round to the American phase, the officer orders the airborne to move over into this field. Now, as they move over, the German player calls reaction. So he can now fire on the airborne unit. The reaction marker is taken away and a hit might be caused on the airborne, and then they carry on with their movement and get to their destination. Also, a unit that is not marked with a reaction marker and hasn't been activated can also react, but its firepower is halved, so that would be down to a 3. And the other thing we haven't touched on is firing. Most infantry have a range of 2. They can fire further than that as long as it is not double or more. So let's say this guy's 3 hexes away, they can fire at him, but their fire factor is reduced to 3. So it's a choice. Do I let them get in range, or do I fire and try and at least put some damage on them? So I thought that was kind of cool. So those are the main mechanics of the game. There are mortars in the game. Let's just have a look at that very briefly, and then we'll sum up with my final thoughts. So mortars, here we go. 81mm M1 mortar. Let's say it's here and it's part of this platoon. So the officer activates the mortar to fire. Now, because these are in line of sight, he's going to order a mortar fire. So we put the 81mm mortar onto this hex, and we have to declare if we're doing 1 artillery mission or 2. So we're doing 1. Now if you do 2, you can't activate anything else in your platoon. So we're doing 1. We roll 1d6, and it's modified by -1 for Germans and Americans. A 1 to a 4 means it's on target, so it's going to be on target. If it's 5 to 6, then it's drifted, and you have to roll 1d6 to see what hex it drifts into. So it would be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then at that point, the officer can cancel the thing, but it might land on someone that you know, and you think, no, we'll continue with it. But let's say we got that roll, it's on target. We then roll 2d6 with our fire factor of 8. Roll our dice. We've rolled 5, 6, 7, 8. We then look at our combat chart on an 8. And we rolled a 5, 6, 7, 8. So an 8 on an 8 is a 2. So 2 divided by 2 because they're in open terrain. So that's 1 hit. The Germans received 1 hit. Let's say you already had that hit, so one of them is reduced. Okay, so that's how mortars work. And if we had gone for 2 artillery missions, we could do that whole procedure again. Now, the last thing I'll say is that there's a spotting mechanic. It's not like you roll to spot, but it's a line of sight thing. So in the rulebook, it gives you distances which you can see up to. So infantry, it's normally 7, or if they're moving, 10. But if this guy was behind this building and this platoon's here, obviously, let me just bring that up, they can't see. These buildings block that. So it's kind of a common sense thing. So those are the main mechanics of the game. There is a lot more to it, but this video would be far too long. So let's sum up with my final thoughts. So my final thoughts on the game. I think it's a fantastic game, as I always say, but I do have just a couple of little negatives. And the negatives are that I think there should be some sort of morale track to keep control of that, because when I was playing some scenarios I was losing track of who had what morale, and also maybe a player aid just to show the turn sequence, so as you're playing your first few scenarios you can get that in your head. Apart from that, great game, great little system. It is a bit more in depth. It took me a couple of plays to really try and get into the system. If I had to compare this, it's on the scale of Last 100 Yards, but it's a completely different game. You can't compare them. Would I recommend this game? If you're into World War II and you like tactical level war games, tanks, infantry, platoons, then I definitely recommend this. It's definitely a game you're going to have to sit down and read through the rules, There's a few videos online. So yeah, thumbs up from me. Massive thanks to Draco Ideas for sending this to the channel. So if you enjoyed, guys, make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.